We're going to go over some mobility exercises and stretches you can do for yourself for your forearms, which might be having tension, pain, or discomfort for a variety of reasons. Primarily when we see this, it's from people that have laboring jobs that they do a lot of grasping, manipulating objects with their hands. These are people that do a lot of lifting and they're grabbing and holding heavy weights, or these are people that have changed their posture. Let's think about sitting at a desk all of a sudden for prolonged periods of time. If we're sitting at a desk and now our palms are turned down, that creates different tension in there, and then we go back to our workouts or back to our normal movements, and that might be affecting us and giving us discomfort. When we work on one side of the forearm, we have to work on the opposite side too, right? Those muscles come down and they create a balance system. So if one side is off, the other side is off. So it doesn't matter which side we have the pain on, we want to treat both sides. The other thing we want to think about is when we are doing our lifting and we are doing some exercises or we are sitting at our computer, we don't want our wrist to be completely flat. Do you see how that's flat across the top there? If anything, our wrist should be in a slight bit of extension. That's actually where we have our most power and efficiency. That's the way our hand is designed to work. So pay attention to that in your sitting positions or your lifting positions. If your wrist is flat, that might be creating excessive tension in the forearm. If you bring that wrist back just the slightest bit, that should be a little bit easier for you to do. Now, one of the tools that we want to use to mobilize some of this soft tissue is a lacrosse ball. So if I'm going to sit down with my palm facing up, I want to take that lacrosse ball and I want to put some pressure onto my soft tissue parts. And when I find a spot that's tense, I'm going to hold that pressure and I'm going to mobilize the wrist. So it could be up and down, left and right, clockwise or counterclockwise. I could open and close my hand, or maybe I want to just move one finger at a time as I do this. We can also create a little bit of a torsion force with that. So when I'm applying this pressure, I can either turn that ball in a clockwise manner or in a counterclockwise manner. Now, whatever one is the stiffest and most restricted is the one I want to work on the most. So if I turn it clockwise and that feels really stiff, I want to stay there and then again mobilize that wrist. As that loosens up, I'm going to move into different spots. If I want to do the back of the arm, I'm just going to turn that palm down, and I can do that same thing again where I'm self-applying force through the ball and then mobilizing the wrist. When I find my tender spot, I can create that clockwise or counterclockwise twist and hold the position that's most restricted as I mobilize the wrist around that restricted tissue. As I get better at that, I want to be a little more aggressive. I can only apply so much force like this. So if I put my body weight into it, I now get up and I put my palm down now to work the palm side, and I put my other hand right on top of it, and I press down. I can create a little more pressure and still mobilize that wrist the same way. Now I can't get that same torsion force that I can here. I could try to get a little torsion here, but it's probably going to slip on the surface, so it's not as effective. If I want to do the opposite side, I turn that palm up, and this will be kind of more towards the outside of the elbow where the meaty part is, and I'm kind of compressing that tissue between the heel of my hand and that lacrosse ball, finding the spot that's restricted, and then mobilizing my wrist or my hand or rotating, however feels good for me that feels like it's releasing it. As I want to get more aggressive with that, if we have a second lacrosse ball, I do that same thing where I'm now going to be pinching the tissue between the two balls, and I can really grasp that tissue as I mobilize that wrist. Okay, so if I'm palm down, I'm working on the inside. If I'm palm up, I'm working on the outside. And again, same thing. Okay. If you don't have a lacrosse ball, you could use a tennis ball. That works really well too. Right, just a little softer, but same idea. You could kind of work with that. You just kind of have to grip it a little bit with that opposite hand, right? But that would be effective. If you happen to have one of these double balls together, or if you take two tennis balls and tape them together, that kind of gives you a little track to stay in. And from there, you could just kind of roll up and down in that track, right, with the palm up. You can do it with your thumb up, which would be a nice different one that you could do, or you can do it with your thumb down to work different muscles. And again, I can apply pressure with my opposite hand. You can also do it with a foam roll. That would work just fine. Do some with the palm up, applying some pressure through the heel of your hand, or with the palm down, again, pushing through the heel of the hand. I could do this on the floor also. Down on hands and knees might be a good position for this to work. If you don't have any of this stuff available to you, get creative. You could use a glass bottle, like a wine bottle or a beer bottle. Just don't put so much pressure that you're going to break the bottle and get yourself cut. But those things would work just fine too. Now, after we get some of that tissue mobilized, we want to stretch it out some more. So if we're going to stretch out the muscles on the front of the forearm, what we want to do is we're going to have our palm up towards the ceiling, and then we're going to keep that elbow all the way straight, and then bend that wrist back so now my fingers are pointed down to the ground. With my opposite hand, I'm just going to grab onto that and give a little bit of an overpressure, and from there I'll feel a stretch from the inside of my elbow to the front of my wrist as I hold that. Now, stretches we want to hold for at least 2 minutes if we're really trying to create that tissue change. It could be 30 seconds, some people will say, and that's a nice warm-up, but after you've gotten warmed up and you have mobilized the tissue and we're trying to create some more length, we want to go 2 minutes or longer if it's a problem for you. If I wanted to do the opposite part, the outside of the elbow and the back of the arm, I'm just going to turn that palm down, point those fingers down to the ground, elbow stays straight, and again I can give it a little bit of an overpressure. All right, and that's a pretty effective stretch for most people. You could do it the other way, that maybe your fingers are pointing up to the ceiling, just make sure that elbow stays straight, or if the palm is in the other position, again, elbow stays straight. With any of the ones where you're bending your palm down and you're giving some overpressure, if you're getting any sensory issues in your hand, particularly in these three fingers, you want to stop what you're doing. You're probably irritating your nerve, and it's temporary. It'll go away when you take the pressure off it, but if you sustain it, it could create more pain and last a little bit longer. So we want to be aware of that. It should just be a muscle stretch that you're feeling into your forearm. You could also do this same activity with a wall, right? So if I just put my hand up against the wall and press my heel of my hand flat, I could stretch with my fingers pointing up towards the ceiling. I could turn, so my fingers are pointing backwards, or continue to turn, my fingers are pointing down towards the floor. What's important is that the elbow is straight the whole time, and we're pressing the heel of the hand flat. We could do the opposite side too, again with the back of the wrist, right? So I could try it with the back of my wrist and my fingers pointing down. That gives me a stretch in that forearm. Maybe I want to be pointing them back. Might give me a stretch in that forearm. If you have a lot of rotation in your shoulder, you might be able to point that up, and that would give you a nice stretch too. Same thing with that one though, because we're compressing that wrist. If you're getting any sensory changes in your hand, we want to avoid that. So ease off of those things. The other ones, make sure that you guys keep up with, you know, to do the 4-point stretch when you're down on hands and knees, right? And we rock forward and back on those wrists, and left and right. We also do them pointing out to the sides. We also do them with our fingers pointing back, because the more mobility we get in the wrist, the less stress it's going to be on the forearm. So that's how we want to mobilize the forearm. See how that goes. Hopefully it gives you guys some relief. If you're really flared up where it's tender to touch, and it's particularly at the elbow point, whether it's the outside or the inside, get some ice on there. Grab an ice cube, give it a nice massage. Have a towel nearby because it's going to start to drip. But you want to ice it down at least 5 minutes, 4 times a day or more, because if it's inflamed and it's irritated like that, if we don't calm it down, it's going to continue to get irritated. It's easy to get irritated at that point. So ice it down, do some stretches, try to work on some of that tissue mobility. Be aware of your wrist position, whether you're lifting or whether you're at your computer, and see how that works. Let me know if you guys have any questions.